Saba, where are you off to after you leave King County?
Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. So I'll be in an equity and engagement specialist position with them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You have to move, or you can, it sounds like it's still here.
Yeah, their office is actually downtown in Seattle. So I'm still based in Seattle.
Yeah. Right on. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get started. Hello and welcome to this year's Solve Climate by 2030 Global Climate Dialogue for Washington State. My name is Lindsey Wielick, and I have the honor of hosting this year's Washington State's webinar along with my esteemed colleague Janelle. We are both students at Western Washington University in Bellingham, and we are currently interns for Solve Climate by 2030 through Bard College for Environmental Policy.
So this webinar is currently being recorded, and it will be uploaded to the channel Solve Climate by 2030 on YouTube. And we would love to hear from you, so please send any questions in the chat that you may have for the speakers. Even though we might not be able to get to all the questions, it's still important to let us know what the community is interested, and we will be asking questions after the speakers present. And so before we begin, we have David Blockstein here, the project co-director of Solve Climate by 2030, who would like to say a few words.
So it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. David Blockstein, I'm actually based in Maryland, just outside of the other Washington. And on behalf of the project, I first want to thank Lindsey and Janelle for stepping up on this. We have, over these 2 weeks, we have about 110 of these global dialogues around the world, and there are very few of them that are entirely run by undergraduate students, with really them taking all of the leadership. And so delighted to and thank you both as participants in our social media internship, and then stepping up in organizing this webinar. So you will soon hear in video from my colleague, Dr. Eben Goodstein, the director of the Bard Center for Environmental Policy. So he will be giving you some background about the project, but I just want to personally welcome you and to say how excited I am to have this webinar, and I'm very interested in hearing from your speakers and learning about things that are going on in the great state of Washington. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, David. So now we will show a message from Dr. Eben Goodstein, and Tara will go ahead and play that.
Welcome to the Solve Climate Global Dialogues. You're participating in one of 125 events held across the planet, including in almost all 50 US states, part of a global project called Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Eben Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, the lead organizer for Solve Climate. This last year has been difficult for everyone. As the world looks forward to recovery from COVID, we are focusing tonight on the most important question facing humanity. What can we do in this year in our regions to help solve climate change while supporting struggling communities that have faced widespread loss of life, economic disaster, and joblessness? Worldwide, from Australia to Kyrgyzstan, from Colombia to Malaysia, and from South Carolina to South Africa, Solve Climate audiences are hearing from local experts and young leaders about concrete steps that can really help nations solve climate change while creating much needed jobs and incomes for everybody. The year 2020 was one of the 2 hottest years in human history, bringing with it massive forest and grassland fires, record-breaking storms and hurricanes, and relentless rising seas. Solving climate is the challenge which the human species must now face. There's hope for the future. Solutions have continued to advance. This year, China committed to building a carbon-neutral economy, while the US rejoined the Paris Agreement. Solar, wind, and battery prices continue to fall, while major car companies have been rushing to electrify the global fleet. Worldwide, movements for Black Lives Matter and Me Too are leading in bringing much delayed and urgently needed justice to the world. Time is short. We have until 2030, 10 years to solve climate. We can get a lot done in this decade. We have the solutions, but only if we focus the world on climate solutions and justice, and then do the work we have to do in our own cities and regions. For students listening, you are the leaders. Without you, the future we envision will not come. I'm asking tonight for your help. We're going to discover powerful ideas for climate solutions and climate justice, and how you can be a part of the solution. But this message must reach beyond those of us who are listening right now. Would you ask all your teachers this week in every subject to make climate a class? The teacher can assign tonight's webinars homework for the students, and then afterwards have a one-class period discussion. And we mean every subject, from art to engineering, psychology to business, dance to chemistry. Teachers don't need to be a climate expert to lead a discussion about climate change. The Solve Climate Project has easy-to-use teacher's guides in nearly every subject and in 3 languages to help teachers make climate relevant to their class. It only takes courage. Don't take no for an answer. Ask them, why not? This is your future. You'll be surprised how many teachers will say yes and thank you. Imagine you, thousands of leaders like you around the world, asking their teachers once every school term to make climate a class. That means every term going forward, hundreds of thousands, millions of students worldwide in their classes talking about climate solutions. COVID has shown how fragile our global economy and society are to extreme events. It's also shown that vulnerable people are facing the hardest, most damaging impacts. This is also true with climate change. Science has made it clear that unchecked, global warming will mean an unending onslaught of extreme events, causing untold suffering for humanity and all creatures, species driven to extinction, a planet of environmental refugees. And yet, in many ways, this is the most exciting time to ever be alive as a human. We have the tools and networks and technologies to rewire the world with clean energy, reimagine the global food system, reinvent transportation, and regenerate forests and grasslands, and be well on our way to solving climate by 2030. Tonight, we will learn how to do this in our own cities, our own towns, our own regions. Thank you for the work you will do to promote climate solutions and a just world.
And now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speakers of the night. We have Saba Rahman, who is a climate engagement and preparedness coordinator at King County, and supporting speaker Amina Kedir, who is a project manager at King County's Wastewater Treatment Division.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if... Can you see the presentation full screen? All right. All right, so just to get us started, we're going to be sharing a little bit about what equitable climate solutions could look like. And of course, this is mostly going to be centered on some of our work in King County and what we're seeing around that. But I'll try and connect it as folks are in other areas too. So to start us off for introducing ourselves, something we like to do is tell a little bit about our climate story. So I'm going to go ahead and then Amina will, but of recognizing that we all sort of have experiences that connect us and of us experiencing climate change. So something like the Yale climate communications research has shown is that people don't always think about how climate change directly impacts you. And it's like, it's something that's happening, but it doesn't always impact you. But especially for us in Washington, we've definitely been seeing impacts. So for me, what brings me to this work is my family is from India and my parents immigrated from there. And we're seeing climate impacts over there, where this photo on the top left is a photo from about 1.5 years ago from where the village where my dad grew up, and they're seeing heavier monsoon seasons and more flooding that's happening, and they don't have the infrastructure to be prepared for that. And then the photo on the top right is of New Delhi, where my mom grew up, and that's where I still have a lot of family, and the air quality is so poor. I know some of us in Washington are more familiar with air quality index numbers, and they sit at like 150 to 200 all the time. And that's like very dangerous. So that drives me. And then I grew up in the DC area. As I was just telling David, I grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, outside of DC. So we're seeing impacts there where there's heavier rain events. So this photo on the bottom left was from late 2020. And that's a highway, and all the way in the back, you can see all the cars backed up. And then on the photo on the bottom right, just to show that we're seeing higher heat days and heat waves come through. And then I'm going to let Amina share a little bit more.
Thanks, Saba. Hi, everyone. Once again, my name is Amina, and I am a project manager at King County Wastewater Treatment Division. And I work on capital infrastructure projects as well as water quality related planning projects. And so my relationship with water started at an early age, and I saw the impact of climate change at an early age. And I was born and raised in Ethiopia, and growing up, I witnessed the impact of climate change in so many ways, including through increased heat wave, droughts, flooding, sea level. And these are challenges that, that are kind of global, but I saw them kind of firsthand growing up in Ethiopia. So yeah, that's kind of my story in short. Next we are going to, these are the impacts of climate change that we see in Washington State. In Washington State, we've seen numerous impacts, including in the past, but also as recent as last year, where the air quality was declared as unhealthy. And additionally, other impacts of climate change are sea level rise, poor air quality, increased wildfire smoke, reduced snowpacks, and reduced water quality as well. So those are the major impacts of climate change that we see quite frequently at this point.
Awesome. And I realize I didn't introduce myself. I am the Climate Engagement and Preparedness Coordinator at King County. So I focus on climate equity and community partnerships work. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So first off, just to start off, I just like to acknowledge too that we're building off a lot of regional climate justice work. So the county is in the last few years, we've been developing out new actions around this, but recognizing that we wouldn't be able to do this if it weren't for this regional effort and a lot of different work that's gone in to this. So Our People, Our Planet, Our Power report, this green one, that was produced by a community-based organization that focuses on environmental justice. And it really gave a lot of basis for why we need to do this work. So really looking to what are the communities that are experiencing these impacts, like how are we listening and recognizing where the need is. I'm gonna try and give like some high level examples, but a question to sort of think about, and I'm gonna attempt to show some examples of how can we better recognize some of the existing inequities that we have to help create and like help use those to help create equitable climate solutions. So this gets to this root causes graphic. This is something that the Urban Sustainability Directors Network produced. You can see on the bottom what report that's from, but it basically, I find this to be a really great graphic to show what are the root causes of climate sensitivity. So what makes people more vulnerable, right? So it's not just that, oh, I live in an area where there's sea level rise. It's also, what are the existing inequities that I'm experiencing? Am I already low income? Am I already in an area that has less access to resources or less ability to, during an emergency event, to get out or get resources that they need. So this is something that I always like to share, just to ground of like, this really brings us back to why we do this work. So these are a couple maps. So to show, this is recognizing, so on the left, the environmental health disparities map. This is from the Department of Health at Washington State. They actually have this for the whole state. So you can go to the website and sort of explore that. This is just a snapshot of King County. So if for King County, what we see is that that red color where the highest risk is in South King County. So those are communities that are going to be disproportionately affected. And then again, on the right, we see this health and economic index, which takes into account housing quality, health factors, and economic factors. And we see that the lowest opportunity areas are those orange color. And again, it's South King County. So really thinking about how are we using data like this to inform what decisions we're making and where we're making investments. So I wanted to share this example of recently, this is something the county did. We ran a heat mapping campaign. So if some of you have heard of what the urban heat island effect is, that's basically thinking about areas that have a lot of concrete and that retain heat. They're going to experience heat events at a different, like it's going to feel different in those areas, right? It's going to be hotter. And if there's multiple days of high heat, then how is that going to be exacerbated? And like it exacerbates all these health impacts that come with it. So we ran a study where we had volunteers come in. So that's people like just community members. If you had a car, you could run and be a part of this. So they had drove transects in the morning, afternoon, and evening to capture how heat sort of dissipates throughout the day. So I'm only showing you, this is the evening area one. I think it gives the best clarity. So we can see from this that we saw a 24-degree temperature difference between what people were experiencing in different parts of the county. So I think this does, so again, we see that it's in South King County. So and then using this data, how can we use that to recognize where are we making investments? How are we actually going to address these issues? Because these communities are going to be disproportionately impacted by climate change, right? So this is just an example of how we're starting to use that data is for Metro Transit. They have these bus shelters, and typically how they put these in is just based on where people ride the most and like what stops are used. But now they're going to use this heat data and think about where can we put the bus shelters to make those communities more resilient, and it provides shade so those people can actually be able to still use public transit and be able to get where they need to go. So and then this map on the right is something that Metro did to show low transit accessibility. So we're seeing again that that's South King County. So it's really, they're trying to target those areas and we're seeing alignment. So how can we improve our decision making and where we're making those starting to our projects? Another example here is the open space initiative at the county. It's really about like green space and how do we make sure we have green space all over the county. And they did this analysis that identifies these pink areas, they're opportunity areas. So thinking about those areas are places that lack open space, they take into account economic factors. And that's captured here, showing again, these are the areas we need to make investments. And if we're gonna make people more resilient to climate change, then these are the areas we need to start in. A different way of how we can be changing the way we do make decisions is this climate equity community task force that I've been working with for the past couple of years. So the county has a strategic climate action plan and it's updated every 5 years. So this is something where we created an entirely new section that focuses on climate equity and creates a framework for climate justice. And typically how those are run is that people, or these climate plans are done is that people just sort of make decisions who are in the government. And what we decided to do was shift that and give ownership to a lot of these communities and bring their voices to the decision-making table. So we primarily had BIPOC folks from South King County on this task force, and they co-developed the entire section, all the actions that went into it. And so this is just a quick snapshot to show like what's in those. What's in the section. So we had 8 focus areas and really connecting, and they brought in new things that the county hadn't thought about related to climate, like housing security and anti-displacement and bringing in food systems and food security. Those weren't really talked about. So this is just a snapshot, but of just trying to highlight there's so many ways we can try and address inequities in our decision making. And like how you can get involved. And this is just a local example, but think about what local governments you're near. And then Amina is going to share a little bit about the Clean Water Plan.
Thanks, Saba. So now we would like to share with you one of the ways that King County will be making investments to improve water quality. Just to give you a background, King County has been operating the wastewater system for over 50 years. And basically what the wastewater system does is it cleans the water that goes down the drain in our homes. So like in our sinks, toilets, when we shower, when we do laundry and things like that. So all of that water gets cleaned and it goes to a treatment plant and it gets processed and cleaned before it goes out to Puget Sound. So with that being said, King County has a lot of decisions that it will be making to improve the region's water quality and to protect public health. And one of the ways that it will be doing that is through a large project called the Clean Water Plan. And the plan is intended to guide the county's work for the decades to come and be a chance to discuss the investments that protect our waterways and people's health. And finally, the plan is intended to make sure that we distribute the benefits of these investments equitably. So essentially, you know, you guys will be I guess we'll all be the benefiters or the beneficiaries of the plan, which will be implemented over the next 40 years. And then, so as part of the Clean Water Plan, we also collected input from the community in terms of to understand what their priorities are. I think that's the next slide, Saba, if you can. Thank you. So we heard from our stakeholders, including community members, what their priorities are for the Clean Water Plan. And here's what people said. So people said avoiding sewer system failure. So making sure that there isn't a systemic failure within the pipe systems that causes overflows, preparing to fight climate change or preparing and fighting climate change, equity, increasing collaboration between agencies, prioritizing best water quality outcomes, maintaining effective wastewater workforce, keeping rates affordable, protecting our fish and wildlife, and protecting our water bodies, so the rivers, lakes, and Puget Sound, and also protecting public health. So these are the inputs and priorities that we collected and received from the public, including our other stakeholders. And these are the priorities that we'll be incorporating in the plan. So this is one of the ways that you can get involved, as students, as citizens, I guess, of Washington State. You can have a say and comment on what the Clean Water Plan ends up looking like. And that will happen over the next few months in the last quarter of 2021. So those are the ways that you can get involved. So yeah, and other ways that you can get involved are by traveling less or traveling through public transportation, saving energy, using energy efficient bulbs in your house and in your businesses, and just participating in your community, making your voices heard, by recycling, by volunteering. So yeah, to contribute and to fight the impacts of climate change as a result.
All right. I can leave it on this slide, but we just had a thank you slide. We're happy to answer any further questions. I know we didn't get to dive too deep into all of these different projects, but just really that you can get involved in a lot of your local policies and make them more equitable and think about how we can make equitable climate solutions. And there's so many different ways to do that. So thinking about that, and there's so many ways that you all can contribute to the solutions. So I can't see the chat, so let me know if there are questions.
Thank you, Saba and Amina. I think we'll probably do the questions at the end if there were any, but.
Sounds good, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Up next, we have,
You can go, it's okay.
we have Callum Lynch from Western Washington University, who is a project manager for Project ZeNETH.
Yes, indeed. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen in just a second, but in order to have a little bit more engagement for us here, I'm just going to ask all of our audience to type into the chat where they are right now. I think it's really interesting to see kind of the spread of people we have here. There's, 31 of us, and we're kind of all over. So look at that. More Californians, Seattle, Bothell, yeah, so we're all over it. Camino, love it. I'm in Port Townsend, Washington. So right out on the peninsula, kind of the end of the road for a lot of things. And awesome. Cool. Thank you for doing that. It always makes me smile. All right, I'm gonna share my screen. And all right, are we seeing this? Cool. I guess I'll hit present. So, and can you see the sidebar of faces, or is that just me?
That's just you, Kellen. You're good.
That's just me. All right, cool. All righty. So, as Lindsey said, my name is Kellen, and I'm an instructor at Western Washington University, but that is probably the smallest job that I have right now. I counted the other day and I have 4 jobs, and it's interesting because I'm presenting on something that I don't actively work on day to day anymore, which is Project ZeNETH. I started that as a student, as an undergrad at Western Washington University. I was going there for energy policy, and I graduated just before the pandemic. So big kudos to everyone that is in school right now, that is, doing it all online. A lot of gratitude for you guys sticking that through. But since I've graduated, I have been doing a lot of other things. And ZeNETH hasn't been a big one of them, but I love talking about it still because it is kind of my project baby, and I want to see it get shared as far as it can go. But since graduating, I've been working as an energy analyst. I started my own little energy analysis consulting business, and I just do it out of a little tiny house here in Port Townsend. So very small scale, it's just me, and so far it's going okay. And I also work in housing for the Housing Solutions Network here in Jefferson County, where we do a lot of network-based housing solutions work. So getting volunteers, getting different stakeholders, be they builders, nonprofits, city officials, real estate agents together in one room to talk about housing. Because I think in all the places that you all listed, be it California, Bothell, probably even Camino, probably even, Montgomery, Maryland, you have housing issues there. So that's another thing I do. And then for fun, I like to bake, garden, and sail, all of which are definitely impacted by climate change as well, given food security, growing local food, and of course, ocean acidification and everything else. So here we go. Project ZeNETH, Zero Net Energy Tiny House. This project came about because of a very specific thing I was observing, and that was essentially unrealized education. We had how do I say this? Most in any city right now that you go to is struggling with housing, as I just mentioned. That's the work I'm doing, but there is not a lot of connection between that issue of, be it homelessness, housing inaccessibility, affordability, energy efficiency within a house, anything like that. Those problems, while they're great and students know about them and see them day to day and live in them, there's not a whole lot of connection to their education. And I was noticing this as a student in Bellingham, which has a very strong housing crisis or housing inaccessibility crisis right now. And as a student, I was seeing this disconnect. We had all of these students that were paying to go to school and learn how to, be professionals in some capacity. And then we had a city and a society struggling with a big problem. And I realized that these two could be a little bit closer and they could actually go together. We could make our educations more focused around things that we're all kind of dealing with. And wouldn't that be interesting if we got to use what we were going to school for? The vacancy rate in Bellingham is extraordinarily low. This essentially is a measure of how many homes are available to people in any given month or year. So this is from 3 years ago now, and it has only gone down from here. And you can see the counter effect is that rent goes up. People can charge more because there's less supply. So we're all noticing this, we're all existing within this, especially as students, especially as people that are trying to go to school and don't have a lot of means, and are in classes for things that we might not see a whole lot of like tangible use from just yet. Not only that, but as was mentioned at the very start, we're facing some pretty dramatic changes in the coming years. If we want to hit our climate goals by 2030, 2040, 2050, it has to start now, and it has to start with everyone. This needs to be a distributed problem, or it is a distributed problem. We need distributed solutions as well. And so what we're seeing is a lack of housing and poor housing, just not great housing for folks, and then a dramatic need to have a massive drawdown in emissions. So what do we do with that information? Well, I was in a class that was focused directly on carbon neutral building design. And the final project of this class was to design a net zero building. And I thought that perhaps instead of just doing this final project and essentially throwing out that work I'd done after the quarter had ended, perhaps we could actually build this net zero energy building we had designed in our class. Wouldn't that be something if students actually got to use their education and follow through on all those hours of work? And so that is what we've tried to do with Project ZeNETH. We have seen that people are motivated to use their education. This is a poll that we took at Western. Over 90% of students are motivated to improve their education by doing something with it, by using it while they're enrolled. But only about 13% agree that Western has actually supplied an opportunity to use that education in a practical application. So a lot of room to make up there. And that is what we're trying to address with Project ZeNETH. There's our campus. All right, so what is Project ZeNETH? Project ZeNETH stands for Zero Net Energy Tiny House, and it is going to be Western Washington University's first ever net zero energy building. Net zero energy means that it produces as much energy as it uses over the course of a year. So it's kind of an accounting thing, but it's a way to essentially decarbonize the operations of our buildings. Now, Seattle has a really shining example of this, which is the Bullitt Center up on Capitol Hill. It is actually net positive generally, and so it uses, or it produces as much energy as it uses and then some. So it's coming out ahead every single year. But we weren't about to build a 6-story commercial office building as students. We needed to scale that down. And that's kind of what I want to impart with all of you, because a lot of you are students. You need to think about scale. And Saba and Amina did such a good job of displaying what is being done at a county level and how students can get involved in the smaller kind of personal decisions of, composting, traveling less, just being mindful of our personal behaviors. But we also need to be thinking about like, what more could we do in other areas, right? We can draw some things down and push some things up. And I would love to push up student engagement with their education and passions. And so you'll notice throughout my talk that the building itself, this net zero energy building, is simply just a product of us trying to use our education. Like the whole point of this is just for any student in any discipline to use their education. And that's, I think, the beautiful parity between what Project ZeNETH is about and what Solve Climate by 2030 is about. And our introducer, Dr. Eben, he says this so well, right? It doesn't matter if you're in an energy class, environmental class, or a theater class. There's room for all of us to use our discipline for climate, and we actually need to. There's not just room, and it wouldn't just be nice, but we actually need to. If we want to draw down as fast as we think we need to draw down, it needs to be all of us. And it's not going to be through telling people what not to do. It's going to be through telling people, yes, get out there. You know, we need your passion. And so I just want to make that clear that, you know, you don't need to go out there and build tiny houses. You don't need to go out there and put solar on your house. Like, that's a very privileged, very, you know, niche solution. And it's just what we wanted to do at Western with this group of students. So if you're going to take one thing from this, just know that I'm not telling you all that tiny houses are the answer, because I definitely know they're not. After this project, they're an answer. So getting back to the tiny house, this house is 250 square feet. It is off-grid, completely disconnected from the power grid. It's built on a trailer, so technically it is an RV. Very energy efficient. It has to be, otherwise it wouldn't work really to be net zero. It's locally built by A1 Design Build in Bellingham, Washington, and it is completely solar powered. So that is kind of all like the basic characteristics of it. There's no combustion of anything on site because we're not generating our, you know, fuel to combust. We couldn't call that net zero, so we are, you know, solar powered, and we rely on batteries to be off grid. So I think it's an interesting thing to note. This is not the project that I thought I was creating in that class at the start of all this. I really didn't want to create something that was high end. We aimed to create something that was more accessible, more affordable, something that people could more easily do. That is not what happened. And that is something that I made sure to tell, you know, Janelle and Lindsey. It's like, this is not exactly a typical or even a climate justice story. This is something that aimed to be more accessible to more people. And in some ways it hit that, and in a lot of ways it didn't. So I want to be very transparent about that. But what we did do was create a very engaging project for a lot of students to get involved in. So this is kind of an aerial view of where it is going to be on campus at Western Washington University. It is not there yet. It is currently in the permitting phase, but we'll get to that in a little bit. These are some of the interior designs. You know, it's a very slim space, but in terms of a tiny house, it is quite nice. It has all the amenities and then some. This is something you probably shouldn't read through, but this is available online on our website, and it's essentially our data analysis to make sure that we're actually being net zero. This is our measurements for how much energy we're using, how much hot water we're using, what the, you know, kilowatt hours for the year would be for our refrigerator, anything like that, just to make sure we're coming out ahead. So that's what this is, and I'd be happy to talk about that later on how to do that and whatnot. This is actually a product of that class that sparked this whole project. So this is a great example of using something that, you know, our professor helped us create, and then students going around and actually using that. Because as we can guess, if you try to do this, you know, outside of school, you try to do this, you know, with a consultant or someone like me, of the work I do now, you're going to end up paying a lot of money to get this kind of material. But if you do it while you're in school, you actually have a lot of leverage and a lot kind of more information at your disposal that that you can use. All right. So there's a lot of reasons why we wanted to do Project ZeNETH and what we wanted to use it for. But this is kind of the projected uses of ZeNETH when we bring it to campus. So the timeframe obviously got pushed back quite a bit with COVID. Not only did the permitting phase that we're stuck in get even more entrenched and slowed down almost entirely to a standstill, but construction stopped. Everything stopped, and we've already, raised all of our funds, bought all of our materials, and yet we can't build. But we're getting there. But when we bring it to campus, we're going to introduce it to campus, have this open house, have it as an event space, and eventually turn it into a living laboratory where students can go there and actually participate in the live energy monitoring that is installed in the building. So this pertains more to energy classes and environmental classes of that kind of lab environment. But beyond that is also going to be used as a study space, used as a venue for different things, used as a food pantry, with the overall notion to essentially flatten the plane on who gets to use tiny houses, especially, and then who gets to use net zero buildings. Because what we've seen just from, who gets to install solar, for instance, it tends to go to a very specific demographic, wealthy and white. And we really want to democratize the use of these technologies and at least make them more familiar to more people. So that is one of the main intentions of this project, is to get more people familiar, because we're not going to be able to draw down our carbon emissions to meet our climate goals if more people aren't readily engaged with the technology. And it's obviously not just a technological solution. All right. It's important to say that we are not the only ones doing this work. This project that we created came out of our professor, Dr. Imran Sheikh. He was a grad student at UC Berkeley, and he worked on this tiny house that's on the top right of your screen, has all that wood paneling on it with that door that opens out. That is the house that he worked on with the team. It was sponsored by their utility, the Sacramento utility, that sponsored a whole tiny house tournament. So that's an interesting thing for other people outside of campus to get involved in, is thinking about how they can incentivize these kinds of projects to get people excited. But not only was it in California, but it was also in Montana. That's the one on the far left. Then we had one in Ohio, and I believe the bottom one is in Pennsylvania. So this is all over the country, and it's only grown since then. You often see high school students building tiny houses, maybe not net zero tiny houses, but this is, this quote in the middle says it all. It's like, nothing makes that stick like designing and building. For me, I need to learn, tangibly. I need to actually feel what it is I'm learning. And this was a great way to do that. And our team really benefited from having this kind of project to go along with their education in whatever it might have been, energy or otherwise. So where are we now? As I've alluded to, we're in permitting with the state. We have already purchased our materials. So I don't have a slide in here that goes over our budget, but we have purchased all of our materials, and pretty much half of our budget was fundraised through a on-campus grant that is given to sustainability projects at Western Washington University. And I know Western isn't the only school to have grants like that go towards funding for green projects. So if you're in school right now, it is well worth your time to look up and see if your school offers any sort of grant funding for sustainability projects. And Western has opened theirs up to not just include classic sustainability projects that are funding things like solar, but are going more towards equity issues for sustainability on campus. So it really broadens the definition. So go ahead on your own time and look up if your school is offering anything like that that could go a long way towards funding a project that you're passionate about. The other things that we're working on now are essentially creating this legacy plan. We really want to make sure this project doesn't just peter out into nothing. So that is super important for anyone involved in any sort of work, is just to make sure that there's going to be someone to take care of it. This is our team. Not even everyone's listed here, but we had over 30 people, 30 undergrads participating throughout this project, working on everything from our website to policy papers to presenting at conferences, to doing the building systems, the construction, the bidding process. So we had so many different people. And one of my early intentions with this project was to make sure that it really pertains to so many different folks, and that we weren't just getting folks that just look like me involved. And so we had to go out of our way regularly to talk to different clubs, talk to different classes, really promote this project and get people on board that are also excited about, energy, excited about tiny houses, excited about doing something. That was kind of the crux of the whole project. We got students that were also excited about doing something. And these are them. A lot of them have actually graduated now, and a number of them are actually working in housing and working in energy. And that makes me very, very happy to see that come to be. And yeah, that is it. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope there's some questions here. If you want to follow along at all any further, we do have Instagram and Facebook and all that, and you can visit our website to look at that energy data, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kellen. That was great. I think we're gonna go back to Saba and Amina really quick. Let's see. So one question was, thinking back to the diagram presented to us of the parts of the King County predicted to be underwater, what is the time frame for this, and what are the percentages for around the country or the globe for the percentage of land predicted to be underwater?
I did not show a graphic that was showing that, so I'm not sure if there was a different map you were referring to, but I can answer that question a little bit broadly. We have our projections for the county. I don't know the percentage of land, but I know how many feet of sea level rise we're gonna see in like a low, but it of course is a projection. So looking at if we have lower greenhouse gas emission scenario by 2100, so year 2100, we are looking at about 1.9 feet. And if we have a high greenhouse gas emission, they did too, just to capture that, it would go up to 2.3 feet of sea level rise. So I don't know I would have to look into getting the actual percentage of land, but yeah, and then just correct me, Savannah, if there's a different map you were thinking of.
And then I think there was another question. So how are the King County climate and clean water plans better because of the emphasis on equity and community engagement from the beginning? How might the plans have been different if there were only a more typical top-down process?
Yeah, can I share the slide again while I talk?
Of course, yeah.
All right. Yeah, so I, of course, shared a lot of different things. So I breezed past it a little bit, but with the Climate Equity Community Task Force, it was really building relationships with folks for 2 years in advance of even convening this group. And what I do want to flag too is this group had youth that sat on it, and we were able to have some people who participated in it who were like volunteers for different environmental justice organizations who ended up being able to get jobs in the environmental field after because of their experience. So that's something to think about too as you look at opportunities. Don't discount or think that maybe you're not qualified for something if your local government is asking. It's like doing a call out for community members to participate. I always reach out, it's worth it. And most times people really care about your perspective and you have expertise. It's just maybe not used in the same terms as some of the professional experience people tend to talk about. So I think that is just one thing I want to flag. And so part of that process both was building capacity within our communities, and it was created education about climate change just in convening this group. So there was already a benefit in that. And then I think thinking about new topics that were included, food systems and food security and housing were not talked about in the climate plan before we brought in this community task force. And those are just so important to being resilient to climate change. And then even within all of these other topics, it's really recognizing that, I think Kellen was speaking of this a bit, it's like, it's not always accessible. Like sometimes we make these solutions and that's not always accessible to people. Like if I can't afford an electric car, I can't participate in that climate solution, right? So how do we make some of our climate solutions just more accessible to people if you're low income or if you're in an area that doesn't have access to different things? So I think there's a lot of different pieces that go into that. And so this section was owned by the task force, but there are two other sections in the climate plan. There's a reducing greenhouse gas emissions section and a preparing for climate impact section. And so the ownership was on this section, but some of their solutions ended up going into the other sections too. So because they were just really strong and they can, like these community members are recognizing intersections between different social issues and climate change that the county staff wasn't before. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think for you all too, referring back to some of those green jobs piece, the equitable green jobs and pathways was a huge priority, right? So it was like, how do we get some of our people of color in the county and our lower income folks to have access to these jobs? Because that perspective, if we don't have it in the staff who are making these decisions, then we're not making the best climate solutions. So I just wanted to share this again, just to show like the breadth of work that they sort of brought to this. And then Amina can speak a little bit more to the clean water plan.
Thanks, Saba. So for the clean water plan, I think it's very important that the county incorporates the public's input and the community's priorities and the community's needs from the beginning versus doing it kind of, in reverse. And planning for, wastewater infrastructure is extremely complex. And so for the clean water plan, WTD, or the wastewater treatment division, is trying to address these water quality concerns. And this plan will be implemented over a period of 40 years. And so truly the beneficiaries and the people that will be impacted by the plan are the community members and the ratepayers, because the Wake County wastewater system operates is that it's through the rate pay system. So each of us, on our water bill, we have a rate that we pay just to keep that service going. And so because, the customers are the priorities of that will be, really seeing the impacts of the clean water plan, we wanted to make sure that we incorporate the values and the voices that represent the diverse region, the King County region, in the planning process. So hopefully that answers the question. And I saw there was another question also about incorporating community, engaging the community. And I know that was, Saba can go back and talk about the climate equity task force, but I also want to mention that the clean water plan does that too, in the sense that we partner with community-based organizations throughout King County. So we have, just to give you an example, we partner with Casa Latina, which represents the Spanish-speaking community. And then we have Mother Africa, which represents kind of like the North African / the new immigrant communities. And then we also have interim CDA, which represents the Asian American, but also the African, East African communities. And in general, we have 8 community-based organizations that we partner with. And we've been partnering with them since 2019 when the plan was started, or the planning process for the plan started, and we've continued that partnership. And we will do so until the plan is presented to the council at the beginning of 2022.
I can go ahead and add on some of that community engagement piece of, so with convening the task force, a big piece, especially for reaching out to BIPOC communities, so that's Black, Indigenous, or people of color communities, if you don't know that. And a big piece of that is that there's a lot of historic distrust in government, right? So rightly so, right? Like we've seen the policies and the systemic racism that is embedded in this country, right? So how are we gonna first build that trust with the communities that you're trying to reach? So that was really important. It's over 2 years or more of like building up these relationships, going to community organizations, reaching out to folks, being there, investing in their events, sponsoring things, giving them access to different like spaces that they didn't always have access to if there's any sort of piece around that. So that was really important in building those relationships and thinking about who do we want to reach? And people are definitely interested. It was all these, like Mother Africa, we had like 22 community leaders, like all these organizations. They might not be climate justice or environmental justice organizations, but their community members are affected by climate change. They care. It's just maybe they don't use the same words in policy spaces, or they maybe like just don't have the same like specific policy languages. So that was a big part. It was how do we build up the capacity so that you can recognize, or like that folks were able to be like, oh yeah, I've experienced these climate impacts and I have an idea for a solution. I just didn't know I would call that a solution. But people have all of these ideas. So it's really just helping people make those connections. And then they're like, oh, I already knew about this. I didn't know that's what you were talking about, you know? So it's a lot of building up those relationships before you go and ask for them to join something like the task force to develop out policy. But then when people join, it's now that they've built up all this expertise and built up capacity around this, that they're going to be able to go out and keep making like really great equitable policy. It's very like, the point is that we're able to have more people out here advocating for things that benefit our communities. So.
Okay, so I think there was another question that was for Kellen.
Yeah, I see 2 in there. So I can just read it out.
Yeah, go ahead and read it out.
Great. This is from Tara. What sort of policies might be needed to encourage tiny houses or net zero homes? And could I see this movement getting to a scale where it's a realistic, affordable housing option? Yes, I can. And yes, it is in some senses already. So there's a lot of things we can do to spur more, more housing options, right? There's bills going through Washington State Congress right now that would essentially broaden our ability to make housing a little bit more accessible to, and there's a lot of different reasons or a lot of different ways to do that, be they parking restrictions or owner occupancy requirements, or simply square footage of buildings. There's like minimum standards for these things, and we see a lot of policy changing, but more so on the local level. And so places like Bellingham and places like Seattle and Portland, and even my small town here in Port Townsend, they are looking at, allowing homeowners to build an accessory unit on their property, right? It's called an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, which can also be a tiny house if it's below 400 square feet. So that is not only addressing housing for folks because they tend to be rentals and they tend to be rented more affordably, but it's just increasing the overall housing stock, and new buildings are a lot more, are made more easily efficient when they're built new that way rather than renovated, which gets to David's question of, building energy performance standards. And I'll put it in the chat right here if I can. I just looked this up to make sure I had it right, but this is from our state level for building standards. We have a pretty strong energy code here in especially Washington, but Seattle, and there is a lot of attention paid to that. And I was just talking to the climate director for Bellingham yesterday, and he was telling me that at the, I think it's at the state level, they're trying to get a cycle ahead for the energy code. And so they're not always playing catch up to meet code, but they're actually ahead and able to demonstrate to other municipalities or other states that these energy requirements, these efficiency standards are doable. And I don't think energy efficiency gets as much credit as it could. It's not a very sexy topic, but it has allowed Washington to grow as it has without bringing on a lot more generation, which is really important considering the environmental impacts of pretty much any energy source, be it hydro, wind, fossil fuels. They're all very different, but they all have an impact at some level. So yeah, I hope tiny houses can carry on, and I hope multifamily houses can too. We need all of it.
I think I had a question. So, do you think that maybe possibly there could be high school shop classes that could happen to have students learn more about tiny houses, or possibly even build their own or figure out or design their own type? Like, do you think that could become a thing?
Yeah, once again, it's a matter of scale, and I'm just going to drive that home because it's just that first step. Like, what do you, what's the easiest thing you can do, right? And for high school students and for high school shop teachers, if those still exist, I don't know. Maybe you won't make it net zero. Maybe you'll just make it a very simple box. But the engagement is the biggest part, right? Like, we're all here to talk about how to solve climate in all these different ways. So it's just a matter of engaging people, engaging students. I think theoretically, depending on the resource, the resourcing of that class, yes, they could definitely be net zero. But in our case, the state is actually standing in the way of letting us proceed with something that other parts of the state government really wants to support. They want to shine a light on our work at Western at some level, right? Governor Inslee came to Western, and I got to tell him about this project. That's one piece of our government, right? He wants to shine a light on cool things because it looks good for him. But then you get down to the Department of Labor and Industries, who actually has to permit these things, and they stop you in the tracks, right? Because it's complicated for them to do. And so that's what is so frustrating and interesting about doing something innovative, right? It's like, if you go above what people are used to, you get a lot more questions. And it's unfortunate that way. But if you have patience and you can navigate bureaucracy, you might get somewhere. Or maybe you'll just have an interesting story to tell to, a webinar someday. I don't know. It could go any direction.
Thank you. And also adding on to that, Saba, Lindsey and I were wondering, like, kind of relating to Kellen's pushback, like, for your project, like, what types of pushback did you receive, and that the task force received as well?
Yeah, so this was the first time that climate justice was included in the climate plan. So this was a big lift internally to build up capacity among government staff to know that this is important to our community members, and it's something we should need to be addressing now. Like, we need to be on this now. We're already late, you know? So that was definitely, it takes a lot. Like, we were doing a lot of capacity building inside, like educating people on those connections between climate change and all these social justice issues, and trying to recognize those, and then bringing people in, even internally in the county, into the conversation, because a lot of people were doing all of these different types of work, but in like different departments all over the county, and everyone didn't recognize, like, oh wait, would be considered climate justice work, right? Like, we have a local food initiative. They work on improving food access and food security in communities, and like getting access to farmland for BIPOC farmers. And we were like, wait, that's part of like what our community members are asking for. This is climate justice work. And so we were able to like make those connections internally to help support the case for like why we need to have this included. And some of these, and like what we say a lot is that this is just a framework, because we're not going to reach a just society in 5 years. That's just not going to happen, right? So it's really that we need to continue this, and this is a framework recognizing that all of these pieces are interconnected. But yeah, it's a big lift, like going internally, like educating people on recognizing all these connections that, and again, I bring it back to that perspective. It was so important to bring in task force members, because they just know it. Like, it's just, everyone knows that connection naturally, where some folks who have never experienced or been disproportionately impacted by things just don't know, you know? So you'll see, if you take a look at the section, for each focus area, we have a background that explains the connections between climate change and those different topics. And the point really being we were pulling all these different research, like all these different reports and all these different sources to show that we're not the only ones talking about this. This is actually happening, and like we need to be taking action now. And yeah, so this was one of for a county, I think it was the first, if not like one of the first, that was included directly in the climate plan. Because typically what they'll do is be like, oh, why don't you make an equity report over there, like, and just like put it out. But this is in the plan, and that plan is approved by county council. And then that means that the county has to deliver on it, right? So it took a lot to get it in, and we got a lot of pushback along the way, but if it weren't for our community members, we wouldn't have had the leverage we needed to be able to get it through. And it's going to benefit so many people. So it was really important to be able to draw those connections and really advocate for just climate policies. So.
I have a quick question for Kellen. Well, two things. One, to kind of piggyback on the high school shop things, I went to Darrington High School, and I know they are currently working on a tiny house. So that's great progress. And to kind of go with that is like, have you worked with rural communities? And like, if not, is that kind of like one of your guys' major goals, or?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I live in a rural community. Jefferson County here has 30,000 people, and yeah, tiny houses are a big deal out here. They're generally unpermitted, but we have an amazing local, I don't even know what he would call himself, but he brings together students from especially the farm community here on the peninsula, and brings them to work on building boats or building tiny houses. It's called the Community Boat Project. And we teamed up with them in my other job that I have at Housing Solutions Network to build a shelter village for unsheltered seniors in our community. So we built 12, I mean, we don't even call them tiny houses. I think the state the city felt more comfortable calling them wooden tents, which is the most absurd thing. It's like bureaucracy to the nth level. It's like, if that's what you need to call it to make it work, fine, but like, it's not a wooden tent. But because they don't have language in their ordinances for tiny shelters that are made of wood, they needed to fall under some encampment version. So, that community boat project, which has, teenagers from this rural community worked on that. These things are not energy efficient, but they keep people from living in tents, and they are trying to cultivate some sort of communal aspect there by bringing them together. And the interesting thing is that for some of those projects to kind of rope energy back in and climate, one of the biggest impasses to shelter villages, especially in rural communities, is infrastructure. And that's not just sewer or water, but that's electricity. And these kinds of shelters, if you're going to have them that simple, they're just boxes. They're like 10 by 10. They have 2 wall outlets that can easily run off solar and a battery. That's a really cool way to kind of democratize sustainable energy for folks, and they bring that into a different awareness for people that would never get that option otherwise. This is a really, it's not happening, but I've talked to the other project leaders about it, because if we're facing $100,000 charge in pulling electricity to this, wooden tent encampment, it might actually just be easier to put up 2 solar panels and a battery. And I think that's something that high school students would love to see and be part of. Anyone would. So yeah, that's a high hope for me here. And I think it would take, folks donating, but from what I've learned from Project ZeNETH is that a lot of companies actually do want to donate to things that are exciting and can, bring attention to them too. And so there is a manufacturer of solar panels in Bellingham that donated all of the panels that we needed to power our house. They were really excited to do it. So just a further encouragement to, take that small step in your dream, whatever it might be, and just start sharing the story and get excited about it, because your passion, your excitement, it excites other people. There's a lot to not be excited about, and we kind of need that dose. So, just get in the habit of sharing it, and it gets easier. Any other questions out there tonight for either of us? Has anyone lived in a tiny house out there? No. I'm currently in a tiny office. It's affordable.
I was going to ask, I was like, it kind of looks like it could be a tiny house.
It sure is. And it's perfect. It's another use, or another good direction for things to go in. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a question about how many tiny houses have you built to date?
Well, I have never built anything myself alone, but I've worked on, that tiny shelter village, I worked on every single one of those houses. That was a dozen, but that's like, that's communal building, right? So I'm like, one day I'm painting the floors, one day I'm helping frame or insulate. I'm totally a newbie when it comes to construction, but I love learning that stuff. Like I said, I need to be a tactile. I need tactile education. But the main project, Project ZeNETH, all the materials are ready to go. We don't have it built though, and so it's this very kind of tragic, pile of materials under a blue tarp. And so we're hoping that'll change as soon as the state approves our work. But Yeah, and I think I alluded to it earlier. It's like tiny houses are not the end all be all. There's a lot of reasons why they just, they're not the option to go with for a lot of instances. Um, we talk a lot about like thickening up housing supply and living more densely. And you can do that with tiny house communities, but it's a lot easier just to build, a house that has 5 bedrooms, or an apartment building if you just want maximum density. But there's a lot of things that tiny houses offer that living in an apartment can't. And I think that those are trade-offs. I don't think the answer for climate change is for everyone to move to a city and live densely, because I think we're taking ourselves away from the actual like solutions that are really most important, which is that we need to respect our world and our environment and our resources and each other. And just moving everyone into dense living situations is not going to do that. We need people living a little bit closer to nature. So tiny houses kind of move towards that, but not the perfect thing. But if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to email me directly. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. And I love talking people through their dreams and visions on any of their projects.
Yeah, I can drop my email in the chat too. I am leaving this position next week, but please feel free to find me on LinkedIn or something. Send me a message. I don't have my new email yet to give you.
Yeah, we'll probably do a follow-up email to those that signed up and registered for the webinar, and we'll send out all the contact information. And then, yeah, I think that's kind of a good place to end it.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank everyone again for coming out to participate in Washington's webinar and those who helped make this webinar happen. Thank you, Saba, Amina, and Kellen for taking the time to come out and highlight the importance of climate justice and climate solutions for Washington.
With this being like such an urgent matter, we really hope that this made you feel inspired to take action. And whether it's getting involved in your community or talking to your teachers to make climate a class, or getting into tiny houses or joining the task force, we'll be sending all the email and contact information later on. Thank you everyone for listening and participating.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks Lindsey and Janelle for running this. This has been great.
Yeah.
Having me.
Nice to meet you, Saba.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah. All right, Janelle, I'm gonna sign out, and I think